My name is Steve Schneck. I'm the director of the Institute for Policy Research and Catholic Studies. Thank you so much for coming today to today's event. This is the third in our series, our spring series of events on Catholic social teaching and public policy. And the series has been jointly funded by the Institute for Policy Research and Catholic Studies and the Provost's office. And at this time, I'd like to invite Dr. Jim Brennan to come up and say a few remarks. Jim?
Thanks very much, Steve. We have a sort of embarrassment, or not even embarrassment, a conflict of riches today with a superb program that the Graduate Student Association is putting on as a conference all day long on faith-informing scholarship. And also with this third in the series on Catholic social teachings. As I've said to welcome the previous two sessions, that this series really grew out of some conversations that we had with the Institute in terms of its sponsorship in May of a conference on Rerum Novarum, and how good it would be for the entire university community to engage in a discussion of Catholic social teachings. What's been really great about this is that these occasions have been well attended and have been an opportunity for people across disciplines and in various research areas, but interested in through the commonality of the topic, to come together. And I think that's really been wonderful. Today we're really fortunate to have Dr. Kropkowski and Dr. Pumar to talk about this continuing dialogue on Catholic social teachings, and they're far more competent to do so than I am. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Should I go first?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I want to, we were very well organized about a couple of weeks ago.
A couple of
We said we were going to get the concepts up on the board, and then I'll have some remarks, interpretive remarks, and then we can talk about it together as a luncheon colloquy. Okay?
All right. I'm going to move around a little bit. I hope that my voice can project, because I have to confess to you that I don't know how to operate the clicker. So the clicker was not in solidarity with me. Even though I aspire to have solidarity with the clicker. This is a problem of reciprocity, which is at the core of the question of solidarity. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to try to interpret the word of the compendium in terms of solidarity, and towards the end of my talk I'm going to provide what I perceive to be some challenges, so I'm going to comment on what I perceive to be some challenges that I would like to throw out there for discussion. I want to say as a caveat before I start that one of the agreements that John and I had was that all the difficult questions were directed to him. So if you have any questions, make sure that they are directed to him. I'm just responsible for the PowerPoint. That's what I'm doing here today. All right. So. All right. So basically. We have a very clear definition, in my opinion, of what solidarity is, and not only a very clear definition of what solidarity is, but a very also urgent argument in favor of why we need solidarity in this day and age. And this is very well defined in the sections on solidarity, which I quote there in the PowerPoint, basically verbatim. So. Solidarity is an increasing, the Church sees solidarity as an increasing characteristic of human nature, and it's rooted basically in this desire for dignity and to have rights. for individuals to have rights as part of a community. Today, we need solidarity, in part because of increased interdependence. Globalization have created an urgency for solidarity, in part because the church recognizes that there are winners and losers in the process of globalization. And as you will see in a few minutes, the church is very concerned that without solidarity, we may have a fragmented societies, which will create an opportunity for basically for social disorder and for other types of violent behavior. So from a political point of view, kind of political philosophy point of view, or political sociology point of view, I have to be careful when I say philosophy because my colleagues here and he can correct me very easily. So from a political sociology point of view, the whole issue of solidarity is to provide the social fabric for continuity and for social order in societies. Okay? Solidarity, according to this view, then, there is a necessity, I should say, for solidarity to transcend individual atomistic interest that persons may have. So this document calls for what he calls structures of solidarity and for a firm and perceived determination to pursue the common good, which is not necessarily associated with our individual interests. So it's the idea that through a community, we can actually reach these two goals that are key for society, really. And with regard to structural solidarity, the emphasis here is in trying to modify legislative practices, mechanisms of social control, and mechanisms of sanction in society. However, as I will talk later on during my point, I think that we need to be at least aware that by changing laws, we don't necessarily change practices. So one of the biggest challenges that I see, as you will see later on, is how do we change culture, how do we change practice to move on from an individualistic to a collective consciousness or a collective entity. And I think that, at least to my satisfaction, this is not very well defined. All right, so we are solidarity. The purpose of solidarity is to pursue the common good, okay, and a commitment to translate positive contribution, okay, to common causes, and this is something that would avoid, segregation, separation, fragmentations in many cases. One of the ways in which the common good is recognized is to recognize that we owe a debt to society. We're not individuals working in our own in the world of our own, but that we owe a debt to society, and because of that debt, we have certain obligations and certain expectations, not only to fulfill for our current generations, but for generations in the future. I think this is actually very interesting because when we deal with environmental issues, as all of you know, one of the arguments I have made is that we are a stewardship of the earth for future generations. We should leave the earth in better place than when we found it, or at least in the same place. So this opens the possibility for that. The problem that I see here, not that I want to accentuate a lot of problems, but hopefully to encourage some discussion, is the problem that many political scientists call the shadow of the future. That is to say, how do we, what kind of interactions are possible when we know that perhaps the payoff are against us in the future? to collaborate. So this is a very, very important phenomenon. And of course, this goes back to the question of individual calculations that we're trying to get away from, but I think, are very difficult to do so. Okay, so besides, another reason for having solidarity is that it's a fundamental social value, or a fundamental value of social lives. And basically, and again, as you can see here, it says that there is a reciprocal relationship between values and principles that govern our behavior, that govern, it's almost like a code of conduct in society. And values are inherent in this notion of having a dignified human being in this world. Okay, so this is again very much a moral and ethical reasoning, which I think is very well developed at that level with regard to having solidarity in society. However, as I would argue later on, I think that we need to have a much better relationship between the moral argument and the human interests that govern solidarity as well. Catholic social teaching then believes that there are three basic principles that will help us achieve solidarity in life through socialization. The first is truth. Second is freedom, and the third is justice. Okay, and here again you see that justice is seen as a foundation for social harmony and for social peace. Okay, so through these three values in society, we can achieve socialization, solidarity among different people. And then solidarity provides a common good, which is to provide a social harmony in society. That's basically the idea here. All right, so what are the main points of discussion that I see? They don't have to be limited to this, but just to throw some discussions out there. The first point of discussion that I see is the question of ethical considerations, the common good, the necessity for the common good, and to what extent that resonates with our individual values, our individual interests. If we assume, like I think it's very safe to assume, that we live in a society that rewards individualism at many levels, and this individualism is rewarded not only materially, but also morally, in many regards, how can we achieve this higher order of society towards the common good? Well, we had a little bit of this discussion. There is a huge literature in economics, public choice, many other things that discuss this, but this literature makes different assumptions than Catholic social teaching. So how to contemplate these two goals is something that I think is of concern to me. The second concern that I have is the question of solidarity and what we call in sociology the Matthew effect. This is a term that was coined by Robert Merton that basically says that our society rewards people that have a disproportionate amount of wealth. And one of the things that I would like to show you is this graph that was recently published in Arrow Places 4 magazines that basically talks about income distribution in the United States from 1913 to 2003. And the point of the graph is to say not only that we are living more and more in a very divisive society, as if we measure this by income, but by other factors as well. But that this divisive society is disproportionately rewarding not the 5%, but according to this study, which was conducted by a professor at Northwestern University, it rewards the top 1% of society. So my question then becomes, what incentives does this top 1% of society have to have common good? They are disproportionately benefiting from the system the way it is, from society the way it is. Why would they pursue solidarity with someone that has very little? I think this is a major concern of mine that, to my satisfaction, and I'm sure that this will be corrected during the question and answer period, to my satisfaction, the Catholic social teaching doesn't satisfy this curiosity that I have. Okay, so the Matthew affair is very important, in my opinion. We are increasingly living in a diverse society, not only because of income, but also because of race and ethnic relations. As you probably remember from the census that was recently published, between 2000 and 2010, the population of many minorities grew expeditiously in the United States. For obvious reasons, I remember the figure more for Hispanics. Between 2000 and 2010, the growth of Hispanic, grew by 43%. Hispanics constitute today 18% of the population. Yet, when you look at intermarriages, the proportion of intermarriages, especially among Hispanics and other groups, continues to be below 10%. They continue to be very, very minor indeed. So to what extent this figure represents social distance between different groups? I am concerned and worried, and I hope you can change my mind before we finish today, that globalization has adversely affected our economy through the process of deindustrialization. And because of that, we perhaps are not as willing to have solidarity with others that we regard as strangers, as we used to have before. But this is a concern that I have. Again, I'm sure that many of you would convince me and persuade me that I'm just being too pessimistic and I should basically, not do so. Okay, so that's another concern. That's a second concern that I have. A third problem that I have with this particular interpretation of solidarity is, how do we achieve solidarity? There is very little mention here of radical social change. Is radical social change the way to achieve solidarity? This is a problem because if we accept the status quo, and the status quo disproportionately favors some groups at the expenses of others, what are we doing? Are we being an agent of change, or are we being an agent of legitimizing the status quo as it currently exists? And this is a question of concern. Finally, the last point that I would like to bring for discussion is this idea of how subjective conditions, by that I mean our interpretation of the need for solidarity and the common good, is mediated by cultural factors. That is to say, in an increasingly multicultural and diverse society, it is very possible that the notions of the common good may change according to different cultures, different points of views, different historical traditions. And how do we mediate these phenomena? What kind of mechanisms we have? Well, one of the mechanisms we had in sociology was the whole process of assimilation. But studies after studies have shown that in society today, there is less assimilation than in previous generations of immigrants. Even among European immigrants that constitute, by the way, 4% of the whole legal immigration to the United States, even among that 4%, there is less assimilation than it was before. So what kind of mechanisms then do we have to mediate these different notions of the common good? Let me just mention one quick example in conclusion, and then I give the floor to John. For Hispanics, one of the Hispanic community believes that you cannot achieve common good without legalizing the 10.2 million illegal immigrants in the United States, Hispanics and non-Hispanics. Well, that notion of the common good may be very different from other groups. So how do we mediate this? How do we mediate these notions of the common good based on different cultural factors and different historical traditions? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hernan and Enrique. One of the things that I found very interesting as I started to get into this literature is that the existence of this book, of this compendium, strikes me as a very, very interesting opportunity for coming to a richer and fuller understanding of the way in which the church is teaching and what it is teaching about social doctrine. David Walsh and I talked about this after the end of one of the meetings, that in some respects each one of the documents that make up the encyclicals is historically rooted, and in some respects may have currency at that particular time. But what I want to argue now, and I don't disagree with that, but I'm saying that what we have with this book is an entirely new way of reading and engaging the church in a sort of personal, and if we use this as a book that we teach, a public engagement that rarely happens, because it brings together liturgical texts, that is, texts that are part of the canon, that are part of a worshiping community, and weaves them into a philosophic argument about social reality and the linkages of social reality to deeper bonds of humankind that have emerged from a certain kind of engagement with a philosophic tradition that the church has particularly sanctioned and authorized and made, as Father Sullins made eminently clear in his presentation, that there's a pretty straightforward Thomistic, Aristotelian Thomistic argument. But one of the things with solidarity is that that word was used, as scholars who like to count words more than I do, 17 times in the council document, in the Vatican II council documents, and some of those word counters suggested that it was probably there because of the way in which a change in philosophical thinking regarding the person emerged in the wake of World War II and in the formation of a particularly vigorous intellectual and holy voice at the council, who later became the Pope, John Paul II. So that this notion of personalism and solidarity are woven together in a way that brings us, it seems to me, a fresh opportunity to engage, not simply listening to preaching, because there's certainly enough of that. Not all of it is good, but there's enough of that. But thinking with sacred texts and with philosophical texts in an organized fashion about the totality of the human situation and ways in which those that study these things and then act on these things can in fact begin to address all of the questions that Enrique raises. Now, not immediately, because my sense is that this is a pretty long-term process of actually synthesizing. That is, having a text of this sort, a book, allows for a systematic, and comprehensive review of these items. And in that respect, I want to argue that it brings two things. It engages us with the central argument of those sacred texts, that the relationship to the divine as a breakthrough in human consciousness from the divine is, as we learn in the process, a God that is love. And we also learn that this God is also accessible because this God is also an access point to truth. So truth and love are themes that run through and are presented in ways that try to be evocative of our understanding response to both of these texts. So there's a real sort of Verstehen reading of the thing you got to get into and meditate on the text, and I would say encourage students to meditate on the text, and perhaps even, since we are here, perhaps one congressperson, I'm not going to tell you who it was, says, one of the things that we probably should be doing in these prayer groups is less praying and more talking about how we're going to make the world better and holier. And in that respect, this could also be a way of having some discussion about value and action in ways that praying is simply not enough. So I want that to be a central item that I want to begin with. Because I've already touched on personalism, I want you to understand that these texts about personalism and about solidarity can be very carefully traced in a slim volume back to Mounier and Maritain as French thinkers growing out of, in Mounier's case, a deep socialist commitment that then moves towards a socialist humanism, and in Maritain's case, a similar pattern of personalism moving as he did to the celebration of the American reality as the place where liberty and justice and natural law for all can thrive. He also was obviously instrumental in having the United Nations pass the human rights resolution. So these two thinkers, I think, have long been lost within the Catholic intellectual tradition, and I think the recovery of them, particularly since one of my friends, Joseph Amato, has just had this book republished, would be a very, by the way, solidarity. If you don't support your friend's books, what kind of solidarity do you have? Not much. So, and it's a slim book, and that's one. So solidarity and personalism are very important themes. A second general theme I want to touch on is the tremendous confusion about the word solidarity. Look, Bill D'Antonio will remember this. For years, Easter Monday in South Bend, Indiana, was celebrated as a particular Polish turn into the celebrative period of resurrection. It was called Dingus Day. Dingus Day was a celebration of Easter Monday that not only celebrated Easter Monday as a day that even we celebrate, but celebrated it as a way of reminding people that were Polish Americans that was the day that the Christians toppled the sacred gods of water and ended paganism in Poland, and also celebrated the fertility rites and rituals of spring, which, believe it or not, can only happen after Easter in South Bend. The snow may be there well past St. Patrick's Day and any day. So with that as a sort of day of community celebration, both Christian and pagan, at least, toppling the pagans, everyone was Polish on Dingus Day, except one of our dear friends who decided that he should have Solidarity Day. His name was Charlie Howell. He was an African-American activist who nearly got himself shot by Secret Service people when he ran up to Lyndon Johnson and said, when Lyndon Johnson landed in the football field in South Bend to say the damage of a hurricane, or a bunch of tornadoes, I should say, and Charlie Howell said, what we really need is solidarity in South Bend. Obviously, the mood was odd because on one hand, everyone would have celebrated Solidarity Day if Charlie had decided that it shouldn't be celebrated on Dingus Day. So how do we negotiate this? Well, you can negotiate it by developing what I've learned in the ethnic relations business, developing a second cultural competency. That is, you have to be able to do both solidarity a la Charlie Howell and Dingus Day a la the West Side Democratic Club. To be able to do both of those celebrations on the same day was no problem for the vast majority of people, because it was just a matter of another place to stop on your way home, if you could get home. So there's a little confusion about whether that use of the word is related at all to this document. Nonetheless, it's there. Okay? So from that kind of experience, let me move to a few other confusions about it. With Brunick here in the first row, what does solidarity in this text have to do with Solidarność? Solidarność, a trade union's name. Are they the same? Is this a manifestation of solidarity, or is this an appropriation of a particularly powerful term? Because if you're dealing in a recovery of a tradition that has been significantly challenged by one particularly virulent form of modernization that was particularly well expressed in Czesław Miłosz's Nobel laureate speech. He said that it struck him as a person who left the Communist Party but was a poet reflecting on the particularity of place. That in fact, modernizers of the sort that would be Mounier would be very comfortable with too, because becoming a modernizer that makes everyone bourgeoisie was just about as bad for Mounier as what the communist regime and its effort to, what Miłosz says, destroy those bonds of civitas that drew people together in a unity that was related to place and that was an access point to the transcendent in a way that is not quite as transcendent as the symbolizations of what the mystical or the body of Christ are as a meeting place of people to the transcendent, but a national spirit that offers some way of celebrating the mystery of existence in particular symbols that are important because they are the ways in which our personhood and our relationships to others are mediated and brought into being. So this is a pretty poetic expression in his, I'm paraphrasing obviously, he draws us into this notion, the recovery of deeper bonds of unity and humanity are expressed in the notion of nation that some people have argued is a ontological sort of aspect of being, that it in fact is the origin of sovereignty. It gives some spirit that, like the spirit of France. You can have 5 constitutions, but the spirit of France is still there. The constitutions come and go, but the people are still there. Now, admittedly, the 30s, 40s, and 50s and people of that era who have those experiences could be drawn into that notion of solidarity, and Solidarność as well. I also discovered that in Father McLean's awesome collection now of volumes about various aspects of culture, philosophy, and values, that there are some really interesting ways of thinking through personhood and solidarity and human rights that Carlos Maldonado has done. And there's another book that Joseph Tischner and Tischner and Zaczynski, both, let them rest in peace, were involved in writing about these things, rooting their notion of the Catholic tradition, the philosophic tradition of personalism, and this notion of human rights and the end of violence and peace. Then I also discovered that there's an aspect of what Joan Urban is doing in her neighborhood with an elder care program that enables people to stay in their homes as they build community around each other in support of each other for the things that they need and can only do if they help each other. And in that respect, that outreach of a few organizers to building a community about self-help at a local level is very much part of the impulse of solidarity. Then I also discovered really a very, very good book that should be a companion to those of you who want to teach this book. And this is Credible Signs of Christ Alive. There's 6 case studies that Jack Hogan did about programs that the Campaign for Human Development funded. And one is remarkable because it really tells us something about how the essentialist notion that there is a bond of solidarity that is available in this text, as far as it goes, is accurate because essentialist writing is what comes out of this book. But the fact is that solidarity is part of human praxis. It must be created, it must be drawn into being by the consent that people give to each other, not only about collective action, because that's too political in one respect, but about cooperative, collaborative being with each other for their well-being of each other, not using each other and not allowing to be used by each other. And here's the case study of Delmarva, some place that's close enough, and I don't want to complicate your life about eating chicken, but the point is this, that the Tyson Corporation and the Purdue Corporation used the strategy of divide and conquer against the African American community that were the pickers of the chickens, the small business, old white community that owned little chicken farms, and the factory workers who were migrants, who were Hispanic. And the laws were in place for making it possible for having a fair, safe, working condition, but needed an organizer to bridge the gap between these 3 disparate groups and bridge them in such a way as to claim the rights of labor laws, of health laws, and of small businesses to be able to participate not in a massively unequal way, but in a way that was consonant with the well-being of that chicken industry. And that's a process that came into being and obviously must be continued to monitor because the coalitions never stay entirely together. But my guess is that if Hogan goes back and does another case study, he's going to find perhaps some other groups that are involved, perhaps others are not. But nonetheless, churches, Protestant denominations, Catholic parishes were part of it. In fact, one of the Protestant ministers was a lead organizer, got himself nearly blown away by some of the good old boys with their shotguns as he drove down one of those roads, looking at where the various people he was organizing were. But as it shouldn't be a part of America that a person can't stop for a bathroom break on the chicken assembly line so that we can sell dark meat to Belarus because they only like dark meat. Whatever. That's marketing. The fact is that we've got to have some way of bringing people together for fairness, and I think that that's one of the ways of looking at the solidarity issue, and it has to be organized. Now, there are two schools of organizing that I know about, and I think I want to give you just a little contrast of them, because on one hand, my sense is that a lot of community organizing has been associated with a very, very popular icon of organizing, Saul Alinsky. And my sense is that Alinsky had a very militaristic and conflict approach to organizing. It was about gaining power and about beating the enemy and about finding an issue and terrifying whoever the public official or corporate official was. There's another school of organizing that Monsignor Gino Baroni championed, and it was a school of organizing related to cooperation, to find the convergent issue and to do development rather than confrontation, and to expand ownership and cooperative activity by NGOs as mediating organizations between the public-private sectors in particular places. And this is a key point. If you're simply talking about organizing around issues that are related to changing the power configuration, you're dealing with an Alinsky kind of world. If you want to look at a particular place and scale the question to place, then you are linking place and cooperation in ways that are much closer to the spirit of solidarity and finding the common good among the people affected by the common good. One of the particularly odd outcomes of this approach was that Monsignor Baroni was asked by the banking committee in the House and in the Senate to testify in support of a bill that would establish for the first time in the United States a cooperative bank that is unlike European banks that had funding capacities for cooperatives. The United States really never had a vigorous cooperative banking tradition. And it offers an angle into solidarity as well. That is the kind of enterprise that you can do with solidaric approaches. Can be credit unions, can be cooperatives, and in fact, many organizations, nuns particularly, since I looked for some of the organizations that are doing solidaric development in Brazil, for example. They're doing cooperative work. They're bringing people together to expand their participation in the economy, small-scale credit, things of that sort. Well, Baroni went off to testify, and then as he's testifying in support of this new entity, the Consumer Cooperative Bank, he gets an emergency call from the White House and from the Department of Treasury that the Carter administration and the Department of Treasury doesn't want to have anything to do with this bank. This is not our agenda. Nonetheless, the bank passed. We have a vehicle for cooperative development that's still available and now selling debentures in the private sector, operating as a vehicle for empowering cooperative activity. And Monsignor Baroni was called to the White House and to Treasury and said, well, you know, one of the things I learned as a Catholic priest, because I'm part of the church and we've been a bureaucratic organization for a long time, that it is a lot easier to beg for forgiveness than to ask for permission. So we have a cooperative bank because persons acted in a way to make it happen. And fundamentally, personalism and personal action is what is really essential to this question of acting on solidarity. And the personalism that does not use others as objects, but recognizes their personhood and draws them into collaboration is the first step. The next step involves a set of actions that are a bit more complicated, and the scale of them may change from place to place, but as a whole, the notion of personalism is central to it. And the notion that this is a choice, a free activity, is also essential. In that respect, I think some of the talking about solidarity has got itself caught up in more intellectual and explanatory capacity building by academics. And I'm particularly intrigued by how Jürgen Habermas deals with this cosmopolitan solidarity as a way of moving beyond boundaries because of globalization into a new cooperative, communicative community. But I think it's in his mind and in his readers. That is, how do you make the transition? How do you get into that world? I'm not sure about that, but I am sure that reading these texts is a way of engaging the problematic of moving from personalism to interpersonalism and to intersubjectivity, that are the technical philosophical grounds from which this way of thinking in the post-Vatican II era and in these encyclicals, particularly under the influence of a philosophically literate cleric, pope, a person who brings these tools into discussions in ways that do not separate reason and faith, but bind them together into a text that invites our consideration. So there's a twofold dynamic with the other that I want to end with. One is that the other is another human being, another person. The other dynamic is one that I want to share with you because we are friends in this work. There is a divine ground of being that is discernible as a person and perhaps as participation in a triune mystery of being that is loving, that is acting, that is forgiving, that is aid in hoping against hope, and as a way of offering thanksgiving for the gift of existence. And the presence of an exemplar, a teacher, a guide, that disciplines our bodies and minds and spirits and awakens our capacity toward following the fullness of reality and to balance that experience and our relationships in our dealings with others is what I was able to discern as I looked through this text in a way that I found very gratifying, and I hope that you'll go back to it and we can talk more about it. Thank you. Could we start with the difference between solidarność and solidarity?
You mean you're singling me out?
Yes.
You are actually mentioning something which is very important, but I think it goes back in time by approximately 100 years. Because when I try to track the origins of concept of solidarity, we need to make a distinction. What is solidarity? Is it a concept? Is it a normative standard? Is it a way we conduct public policy, or is it just a certain value, philosophical value? And I actually tracked it back to somebody who wrote in the late 19th century, whose name is Eli Halevy, who was a so to speak, a theoretician of public policy, one of the very first. And he, after Marx's report on the condition of working class in England, he revisited the situation of the working class. And actually he has casted an extremely pessimistic judgment about the future of the world. He, back in I would say 1890s, he actually predicted the outbreak of World War I because he tracked it to the unresolved solidarity issues for the British labour class. Now, if you take John Paul II, who has been mentioned here, although accidentally, I believe that John Paul II is picking up exactly when Halevy has left. in his very famous encyclical, he actually looks at the solidarity issue not as a normative standard, but as a promise. And I personally believe, trying to answer your question, but in a maybe convoluted way, I personally believe that solidarity is a promise. It's not a guarantee. It's not a moral standard. It's not a normative standard. It's one way of looking at our world. Just last week, Tsvetan Todorov, who's a Bulgarian/French philosopher, he has published a very powerful essay looking at the unkept promise of liberalism, of liberal capitalism. And he says that he actually says what you have mentioned at the beginning and what Enrique has mentioned as well, that solidarity is a certain promise that we derive from the recognition of the fact that social life is not only made of entitlements, but it is made of obligations as well. So solidarity is a certain promise of a better organization of the world if we keep or if we respect those obligations. How far do they go? There is no standard. There are societies where those obligations are sort of articulated in a better way, and some which actually accept a very loose way of articulating those obligations, going back to John Kennedy's famous statement. It's coming back in this country as well. So to answer your question, the concept of solidarity actually looks at the promise, and we want to be optimistic. John Paul II has somehow already discovered it. It already was present in the political and social philosophy of thinking as something which is a guarantee, as you have said as well, of a better world. If we would like to have a somewhat better world, then we need to look for those promises. There are some promises which have been unkept. Liberalism has not kept its promise. Now, solidarity is still an open question.
If I could just respond to that, there's another dimension that I didn't get into, and that's that within the text, it's pretty clear to me that the notion of solidarity as a particularly shared promise for a particular place and people is one dimension. But there's this other dimension that claims to kind of be the breakthrough into a transcendent, beyond any particular solidarity, that is a solidarity that is related to the awesome gift of Jesus and redemption and access to the triune mystery of being and God within this Catholic tradition. But there's this notion of, and certainly this is not in the text, but it's part of one of the ways I think about these things, is that there's this Bergsonian notion of the open soul that transcends and moves away from the duty of particular closed societies, and that there are souls that break through, and that breakthrough then is judgment over against the society. And I think that the notion that the church is teaching something about simply improving without recognizing that suffering is part of the mission of being a human being is also repeatedly mentioned. So that it's a tough text in terms of any sort of clear progression and better human development. But as human development is a mysterious encounter with giving yourself to another for the sake of the other. And curiously, within the liturgical calendar, we all celebrate Christmas right on the 25th, and then on the 26th, as one of my colleagues always would remind me, we stretch our arms out and, like St. Stephen, are ready for the nails. So the combination here of celebrative and suffering is part of what this church teaching is about. Now, I don't know how you weave these all together, but maybe David Walsh will take a crack at that.
There's one aspect, if I may very quickly. I don't know whether the concept of reciprocity is part of solidarity, because the way I understand it, solidarity actually does not require, nor does it expect reciprocity.
If the concept of reciprocity is not part of solidarity, then how do we get to solidarity without having?
We can go closer to Kropotkin or farther from Kropotkin. That's,
I think that. Well, let me make another comment, Granak, on your question, and that is that I like very much. I find very appealing the notion of solidarity as a promise. But then, as you were arguing for this, I was thinking that then we need to define the promise for whom, and the promise defined by whom. We all can agree on many promises here, but let's cross North Capital and see if they agree with our promise. And this is precisely what I was trying to strive at. The question that in a multiracial but diverse society with huge fragmented incomes that our society is going through, not only our country but European countries and other countries as well, Latin America, is there really solidarity? Besides, is there really besides the nation of sovereignty, besides the nation of citizenship, is there really solidarity?
But the American way of handling the problem of conflict is segmentation. The segmentation is to avoid conflict by, Michael Weiss's Clustering of America gives us 64 types of neighborhoods, and Dante Cini and his collaborator on 12 different types of counties. And we're remarkably living very, very close to persons that are exactly in solidarity with us. My data on congressional districts shows that there's a massive clustering of America into German American, Irish American, Italian American, Black, African American, Hispanic American congressional districts. So we're very lumpy, and we're not involved in solidarity at all, except citizenship. And even there, we have some plaintive voices saying that they want to be sure they get their country back. So we're sure that solidarity shouldn't be around, which is another question for how valuable this kind of book can be for fragmented America.
I don't know if you noticed, John, that we lost half of the audience. Maybe we need to offer a dessert for solidarity when people stay here. After
Dessert.
dessert for anybody for voting for solidarity.
Maybe one part of solidarity is leaving people alone too. But at any rate, I very much enjoyed both of your presentations because you engage some of the more sort of practical issues and bring out, I think, some of the meatier questions that lie behind these concepts, which is always the big challenge. But one of the things that occurs to me is that, and it's the thing that struck me in looking over the compendium of social doctrine too, is that, and you don't notice this when you're looking at individual encyclicals, that there's nothing on the political. That the church has a social doctrine, a social teaching. It has no political doctrine, no political teaching. And this explains a lot of the kind of lack of focus that comes up with these concepts. When we talk about the common good until the cows come home, or solidarity is a lovely concept. But its meaning is only defined when we engage political debate. The question really is, what does solidarity mean when we have to make it, when we have to implement it politically? Which we do. Politics is all about the solidarity. I mean, there wouldn't be any political society without solidarity. The question is, what are the limits of that solidarity? And are those limits an element of solidarity itself? And that's what I mean, there may be a legitimate role to leave people alone. And for instance, even if you think about ethnic groups, some of these ethnic groups want to remain identifiable. But once they start intermarrying with everybody, they cease to maintain their identity. I mean, I doubt if there's really an Irish-American group left in America. There's certainly no Irish group
Last
left.
time the
I'm the last
Hibernians-
Irish person
last
you know
time-
in America. I have to maintain solidarity with myself.
I think that in addition to politics, probably the same can be said about economics. There's very little said about economics.
I just felt like I needed to respond to the idea that solidarity could also mean leaving people alone. And I think the Catholic tradition calls us to engage with others. And maybe people, we can be fragmented or segmented, but I think it's our responsibility to reach out of our comfort zones and be with people. And I think that's what the Catholic tradition is calling us to be as people, not people that are comfortable and even people that are different from us. We have a mutual responsibility and reciprocity to reach beyond ourselves.
No, I agree 100%. But the problem is that in order for us to do that, we have to be left alone to do it. It has to be done freely at the individual and social level. If the government comes in and says, well, look, you've got to make friends with that guy over there, then, it not only is it difficult for me to become friends with him, but it also robs the friendship of any meaning. In a sense, solidarity is lost once it's mandated.
I agree, but I think that the government could have a role in encouraging interaction. I think
The government could be friendlier towards us.
I was
Yes.
struck, I think it was 3 weeks ago, by Michael Gerson's effort in this regard to remind his Republican friends of the recent expression of the encyclical about what solidarity implies for politics, by saying if Republican Catholics take this seriously, something follows from it. And I thought the key word was seriously. Since it was coming from Michael himself, a conservative Republican, it's clear he had been reading the encyclical and got somehow hit by it to decide to express it. I don't know whether you saw it, but it reflects the kind of the practical effort that you're referring to, Enrique, when you talk about, here's the real world. And I thought that was as close as we have or are likely to see a major Republican writer, not himself a Catholic, use the encyclical to ask his Catholic Republican friends how seriously they're going to take this, because if they do, it has serious political implications.
Well, this is the question of what are the transmission belts for this kind of thing into, and here I'm very comfortable, I'm very happy that there is no political activity, no political discussion in the text, because I'm very satisfied with what Pope Gelasius did in the 4th century, recognize that there's a political that is autonomous, that exists, and that's where it seems to me lay people operate, and operate within the guidance that comes from this. And unfortunately, I think the guidance for activity of the sort that as Republicans worry about is that we haven't generated the kind of transmission belt for making a dent in this particular political culture. But I'm not sure, who would do that, or how many issues beyond one issue the church is ready to deal with, or who is the church?
I would like to propose one idea which I think actually would mediate all of this interest between voluntary inclination for solidarity versus more sort of mandated or encouraged conditions for solidarity. If you look at urban planning, and architecture, in many ways they are far ahead of us, because architects and urban planners have discovered that the way we organize our living space encourages solidarity voluntarily without any government mandate. So you want to have solidarity in a neighborhood, put a public park, bring a farmer's market, and there will be a lot of solidarity over time. Voluntary, without any government mandate, no tax breaks, nobody's getting a good cut on it, and it really is very genetic. It's very So I think that, I have to confess to all of you that I am a student of urban planning. I read a lot of that on the side. I'm glad that my chair is no longer here, so that way he knows that I don't read sociology lately that much, but reading urban planning is great because, you get these ideas, these forms of communal activities that are very, very organic, very voluntary, and they work very well, and they do improve neighborhoods when this happens. We know by any measure that we can with any criteria that we could devise to measure this, that neighborhoods that have public places are better neighborhoods with a stronger social fabric than neighborhoods that do not have public places. This is regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, class. So I would like to say that perhaps next time we have these conversations, we should invite an urban planner here. Invite me too, but invite an urban planner here so that we could talk about how they conceive this organization of space in a way that is, in my opinion, far ahead of other sciences, because it's done in a way that is very intelligent, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, I just wanted to make another point. I think that the whole issue in the United States, at least at the present time, of the labor unions is another point that makes us have to raise questions about solidarity. For example, the very first of the Catholic social teaching had a lot to do with the importance of labor unions. And the most recent encyclical of Pope Benedict, clearly emphasizes, the importance of labor unions. And yet we're seeing, some real challenges to that. And I've worked for labor unions, so I know there's a lot of debate in this area. But if, from a solidarity point of view, if we were really committed to the importance of labor as a way in which a person expresses their being and contributes to the common good, perhaps, as church, we'd be taking a stronger stand on what's happening now. I just wondered how you see that fitting in.
One of my examples that I missed in my notes there, the name of the UAW magazine, newspaper, is Solidarity. But my experience in labor training programs was that person singing the song Solidarity Forever. I interviewed people and talked to them at length. Their sense of the union as a sacred bond was very, very strong, particularly among persons that were kind of open to enthusiasm. And we don't have that capacity to energize that enthusiasm. We've bureaucratized in some respects, and we've allowed the notion of collaborative activity in the workplace to wither. Although the bishops in Wisconsin did put a letter out in support of the action there that outlawed collective bargaining. But we've slipped to what 12% of the population is organized in labor unions now.
Yeah. Do you think that it's possible that the concept of solidarity, as we're seeing it, assumes that other persons, that the other is willing for this personal relationship, when in fact that might be a skewed kind of assumption in today's society? It seems like the description of solidarity as this very personal relationship requires one to be able to relate to others who are looking for a personal relationship. And if that's not the case, I was very struck by what you pointed out about the community organizers and some being more on solidarity and some going in a different direction. There are some that would say that when one cannot relate on a personal level, that perhaps more power issues need to be looked at.
I think the personal level is at the organizing committee of a group. At the membership level of a group, what you need is to have very able rhetorical and community building public techniques rather than one-on-one personalism. And this is just a matter of group dynamics, leaders and followers, organizers, leaders and followers.
Yeah, and usually with populations that are categorized as others, quote unquote. There is a great deal of suspicion. So sometimes we need to go back to some basic principles of humanity, such as being genuine. Being genuine in our exposition of having solidarity. Because being genuine overcomes sometimes a legacy of suspicion among divisive societies.
I would just qualify that, as I understand, the Catholic perspective on solidarity grows out of the recognition of the uniqueness of each person as a creature of God, and then the quest for understanding what it is we have in common and how the common good emerges from the aspirations of all to fulfill themselves as human beings on earth. And it seems that's a much broader notion than a particular policy agenda about pursuing the economic interests of any particular group. And I think it's a little distracting, I think, to view solidarity. I mean, certainly the Polish Union adopted that name, but to see that if there's a decline of unions or the state of unions as the best measure of solidarity, because if one is truly seeking solidarity, one has to move beyond particular identifications with a particular narrow group, be it an economic interest or what have you. If you're in a work situation where there's an adversarial relationship between labor and management, for example, one hasn't fully achieved solidarity. So I think we're looking at a broader notion rooted in persons moving toward a common understanding, common good, that isn't tied to a particular form of organization.
Well, it might even be the occasion when the negative dimension of solidarity surfaces. Clearly, if workers in a particular field organize and the managers and owners are organized, they have a strong incentive to avoid solidarity with the general public. And isn't this one of the issues in this debate about public employee unions, that in essence they by their very nature contain within themselves strong incentives to have less solidarity with taxpayers.
Well, that's the case, to take a very mundane example, that's the case with the National Football League today. The owners are organized, the players are organized,
I know.
and we cannot pay
I know,
to go see
but that's why
the
they
Ravens because it's too expensive.
That's exactly why they shouldn't have any separate status, be regarded as any higher claim of moral stature. They are, in fact, a pressure group and an interest, and they shouldn't be. They shouldn't necessarily be clothed in such a high moral tone as solidarity. They are, after all, a conspiracy to gain their own advantage.
Only till the voter's broom comes out at the end of the day.
No, the problem though is that they pick the negotiators on the other side by being politically active. That's what makes it a problem.
You're right.
I want to draw a connection between Sister Ann's question about the different kinds of organizing and David's comment that sometimes solidarity means being left alone. And John, you're noting that we're a very lumpy society on the local level. We have a lot of local variation because there are many senses of solidarity in the compendium, as you pointed out. By the way, if I can make a shameless plug, among the books that might help you get into the compendium is our book, Tony Blasi and I put out 2 years ago, called Catholic Social Thought, and then the subtitle is American Reflections on the Compendium. And it's a systematic kind of first reading and analysis of the compendium. It's kind of it's an uneven book, so I don't necessarily recommend it that highly, but the best parts of it you can actually get on Google Books if you they don't show you the whole book, and in this case they happen to blot it out, probably the parts of the book that are less important.
But you're actually exemplifying solidarity.
Yeah, there I am. Yes, why not? But we do have a great chapter on solidarity. And among the many senses in the compendium, there is this sense that Enrique alluded to in his PowerPoint, that solidarity is a moral virtue, but before that it is a social principle, and we might say in sociology a social fact. And the compendium is very clear that all the notions of solidarity, or the promises or our aspirations towards solidarity, rest upon the social fact of solidarity, and that social fact is one that should be very familiar to us. It is the precise notion of solidarity put forth by Emil Durkheim in the division of labor in society. That solidarity, and you think the root understanding of solidarity is what holds society together, what keeps it solid, right? And what does that in modern industrial society is our diversity, is our specialization. And that technical notion, which is really amazing to me, has been wholeheartedly absorbed into the compendium and weaved, as you say, into the rest of Catholic thought. So this is a non-Thomist update of our understanding in that. And what that does is, in a way, it affirms the lumpiness of society. A truly solidary society will look very lumpy, because out of that lumpiness, people will find greater cohesion and greater bond. That's our condition in modernity. We can't all be alike. We should affirm and find great unity in the diversity that we have. And so, yeah, sometimes that means being left alone. Not, I don't think you meant to be isolated, but to be different, not to be forced to be like one another. And it also suggests to me that there's room for maybe more than one strategy for social organizing. That, maybe we need the confrontational at times, and we need the cooperational at times, and they're both good, and they should both have solidarity, we might say, with one another. So
I wonder if I could just add another strategy that I didn't touch on, but there's another approach to solidarity that's charity, that is related to simply aiding the poor, which is a long-standing tradition. But organizing is to move toward the causes of poverty in ways that propose remedies through work and the market. What side are you on this one? Should we just be helping people, or should we be helping people to help themselves? And are there different kinds of people that need different kinds of help and different kinds of organizing? So there's a lot of ambiguity there, because it's a compendium, but I think it's rich in as much as it gives us one place where you can look at this stuff at one glance. I'm glad you put your book together, and maybe we should all be doing things like this and find other research that would be part of this, and other reflections that would be part of the Institute, or part of what students should know. I mean, should they be literate in the philosophical and the biblical narrative that is traced in this book as part of what it means to be a pre-professional Catholic?
But the skeptic of me, Jonah, would like to, and I'm sorry if I am trying to be very practical here and mundane, but the skeptic of me says, even when you help other people, we're making the assumption that we're helping other people to reform our society, because our society generally works. But what about those who said our society doesn't work, and we want to change our society in a different way? How do we achieve solidarity there, and to what extent solidarity is possible? And this is a political question that people from every section of the political spectrum consider. You have, if you have, for example, someone that would be obviously left to center or radical, would assume that society needs to be changed in fundamental ways, but also individuals who believe in freedom. Look at the Green Party, believe that there has to be some fundamental ways of changing society. So what happens is that we have all of these notions of change with very little, or perhaps not effective mechanisms of mediation between them. We could, at least with mechanisms that could mediate all of the different interests. This is what I was alluding to before when I was talking about the principles and virtues and at the same time personal interests. Is how to reconcile them, at least to me, is a concern.
I have a final comment. The next time we have a meeting, we should bring in a couple of Jewish rabbis. If you read American Grace, there's a couple of nice vignettes about the rabbis, and it meets a press comment that was read yesterday about the fact that places where the church really preaches politically are the evangelicals, the black churches, and in the synagogues. And this particular case cited in American Grace, the woman rabbi says, we're not theological people, we're doing people. And that is not just a wide statement. With less than 2% of the American population, Jews constitute 6% of the House of Representatives, and they're all Democrats except for one deviant. And in the Senate, they're 12%. And all very far and less. If you look at the legislation they've supported in the last 40 years, they're way ahead of the Catholics in supporting whatever you would call the common good.
One issue that I discovered again in this book is one that I would really like to have some action on, and that is the Jubilee year, and the reconstitution of property ownership in America. Now, I think this is the time we should do the Jubilee year and level this off so we can have a democratic approach to participation and ownership. Because the concentration of ownership that we have today would even surprise Marx. And in that respect, we don't have the immiseration of the proletariat, but the proletariat is just external. And that question of ownership, how do we expand ownership, is a very, very important item. And within that tradition, the Jubilee year and the sabbatical year are items quoted there that remind us about how those traditions are woven into a tradition of governance that was democratic. However priestly and holy it was also a democratic regime.
Yeah, we need to break up Microsoft and Google.
Yeah.
Get rid of them.
Well, except that,
Sell off the parts.
Baker is already doing that.
except the founder of Microsoft now is dedicated his fortune to helping the poor.
Yeah, but they're not giving away
That's not
Microsoft
solidarity.
for nothing.
Amen.
Thanks very much.